This is one of the four films that we selected for a very good reason. Hitchcock was, during his British period, he was one thing that he had not been able to exercise in America. He was a fantastic miniaturist. He was able to paint very intimate, very oppressive portraits in the thriller genre. And in America, he had been used mostly to do movies centered in England, first of all, or in Europe, and that had a more European or English flavor. And little by little, he started approaching America and his point of view on it with Saboteur. He started. And Saboteur was interesting because much like the movie we're going to see tomorrow, North by Northwest, he uses one of his resources brilliantly. He uses a gigantic symbol to prove not only the indifference of great concepts like the Statue of Liberty in Saboteur, where a man falls to his death, or early in his British period, he had a gigantic face, Egyptian face, in the British Museum, watching passively as a man fell to his death also. And tomorrow we're going to see as the entirety of Mount Rushmore watches impassively as people are about to fall their death. So you're going to see that resource. Another one, he started looking at America that way with the big symbols, but this is a particularly important movie for me because this is the beginning and certainly the grandest overture of Hitchcock becoming an American filmmaker, a purely American filmmaker. You have essentially a métier that had belonged exclusively to people like Capra, Sturges, the small town mentality, the small town surroundings, the idyllic Norman Rockwell-esque America. And Hitchcock decides to find fascinating evil within that environment and in daylight in many of the best scenes in the movie. And he turns his gaze to this Norman Rockwell-esque town and he turns it upside down, finding menace in the most uncommon places. So much like he does with the big symbols like the Statue of Liberty or Mount Rushmore or this and that, he does that in this. And that repercussion of what he does resonates all the way to our days with Blue Velvet. You would find similarities in the way that a great darkness can be subjacent to great pulchritude, great clean houses, beautiful. Actually, a montage that opens Shadow of a Doubt. Some of you will be reminded of the opening of Blue Velvet. And I think it's essential for this. Hitchcock was a guy that was very connected, a man that was very connected with art. And I think that I would make a case, this is absolutely my theory, that Hitchcock uses a painter like George Tucker for North by Northwest and architecture of the most modern style, and we'll talk about why tomorrow. And it is my belief, we know that he used and was inspired by Edward Hopper in creating the House of Psycho, by the House by the Railroad, the painting of Hopper. But I believe this movie, has a very Hopper-esque feeling in finding the darkness in seemingly innocent scenes. We are going to see also some of the stuff we've been looking at in the movies. We talked about how Hitchcock finds that given the right context, any object can become the carrier of great tragedy or a very ominous object. And we talked about how he chooses metallic objects all the time. I ask you to pay special attention to the object tonight and what it means. And please remind me if I'm feeble and feverish. Remind me to talk about it after the fact. But it's as symbolic as the key was in Sebastian, as symbolic as the pinprick tie pin was in Rosk. It's really, really important to understanding the movie that you see what we're talking about, because a lot of one of the easy reads of the film is to talk about the duality. Obviously, we're talking about a man and his shadow, or a woman and her shadow. That's duality right there, and we can talk about it on Jungian terms, and we can talk about it as that yin and yang, opposites, blah, blah, blah. But apart from the duality, which is stated in the film many, many times, through the name of a bar, through dialogue, through the way two people mostly complement each other. Some of them serve the same function. The duality of the man that the character of Charlie has to choose from, blah, blah, blah. We'll talk about all that. But that you can read, you can find in Spoto and Robin Wood. You can find it in many analyses of the film. I try to, other than that, also talk about what I feel about the movie when I discuss it with you. And I believe there's something more provocative at hand. So how many of you have seen the movie, so I don't spoil it? Oh, I better shut up. Okay, so I will not tell you now, but we will discuss it later.
Just a quick poll. How many people have been at either of the previous talks last week? So a pretty good number. But for those who haven't been, you spoke last week about why you selected the 4 films, but you also talked about the 4 categories of thriller, Gothic, Journey of the Mind, and American Gothic. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the film tonight?
This is the birth of the American Gothic for me and Hitchcock. And very much a movie that prefigures even things as native for me as To Kill a Mockingbird. I think is the fact that Hitchcock tackled something nobody had tackled before. It really needed the point of view of somebody from the outside looking in. And for him, it was his most personal film. And I must agree. This is a movie that happens in the life of Hitchcock right at the crucial moment. He moves to America at the brink of the war. He is called out for not being in Europe during the war. He's called many things publicly, almost explicitly a coward and a deserter. And even although he does his part in the war effort with his craft, as a filmmaker, he's under great duress. He lands in America, and he lands in America to be under the tyranny of an incredibly creative producer, which, believe me, is horrible. And I think he really needed a breather. He had a very difficult experience with Rebecca. I identify also with the fact that he was at his fattest. He actually mentions it, I think, in the Truffaut book, that he says he caught a reflection of himself in a window in a shop in Santa Monica, and he was horrified. And that, for a man like me that smokes Twinkies, that's my addiction. I snort ding-dongs and Twinkies. So I can assure you that compulsive eating doesn't mean he was super happy. He was at a very low moment. His mother was dying and died during this period, and he was not able to be by her side. And in fact, many read a lot in this fact in Shadow of a Doubt, because the character of Emma, the mother of the family, is one of the few, as Spoto says, is the last time a mother is portrayed in a positive light in Hitchcock films. I don't think it's true. Tomorrow we're going to see one of the best Hitchcock mothers ever in North by Northwest. Fantastic character. So it's not the last time, but I think it's a time when she becomes not an aleatory character. She doesn't become a character that proves a point. This movie has 2 great love stories. One is the niece and the uncle, and it can be platonic, or we can elaborate more and be a little more presumptuous, but the other one is, without a doubt, the sister and the brother, which is the mother of the family and Uncle Charlie. It's absolutely a fantastic love story and incredibly well sketched in the film. Emma Hitchcock was the furthest away from the character of Emma, the mother, in this film. I think that for those that try to peg Hitchcock in one place or another, those that wonder, is Hitchcock this or Hitchcock that, I think Hitchcock is so multifaceted. But for those that say, is he a misogynist? This is the antidote to that. I think this movie has not 1, not 2, but at least 3 of the best female characters in a Hitchcock movie. None of them are blonde. None of them are sexy in the sultry siren kind of way. And the 3 are, I think without a doubt, other than Uncle Charlie, the smartest characters in the film. And they represent three different ages of womanhood. And I think they are, Shadow of a Doubt will always be the ace in the sleeve to trump that discussion late at night while you're sharing a pizza and six packs. So, no, Shadow of a Doubt. Oh, damn you. I leave that to you for the trivia games, but I think it was very important in the American Gothic and what I call the trilogy of the shadows. Hitchcock has three movies that portray that. One is Shadow of a Doubt, not very subtle. Strangers in a Train, that has a lot in common with this film, and we'll briefly touch about why. And the last one for me is a movie that, like Frenzy, is not well regarded, but I admire and adore. And hopefully one day we'll come back and we'll do another 4, and we'll do Suspicion. And Suspicion, those three movies are the trilogy of the shadows for me. And they deal with the duality of the being. I really think there is a possibility that we're going to talk about and discuss to talk about how Charlie and Charlie are really one, but in more ways than just similarities. So these are two very important touchstones in the Hitchcock pantheon, the beginning of his American Gothic and part of the trilogy of the shadows, I think.
So you mentioned that this was also a personal film. His wife Elma was collaborating on a number of his films, but she collaborated on this and the script. And I find it interesting that it's the only time that his mother's actual name is used.
Yeah.
And Elma's part of it. Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration between the two of them?
Yeah, this was a very interesting process of screenplay writing because many writers were involved. Yeah. Originally, it was pitched to Hitchcock as a treatment that had a few pages. It was called Uncle Charlie, and it was pitched by the husband of the head of story at Selznick. And it was a very different pitch. It was a very coarse idea, and then it was further developed when he found Thornton Wilder. Now, Thornton Wilder was known primarily by the creation of a great play called Our Town, which was essentially the Norman Rockwell-esque American. And the star of this film was actually was the understudy on Our Town. And this is something that is, and in the casting, if I may do a parenthesis, also it's interesting for you to know that the little girl that appears in the film, she was cast at a bus station. Hitchcock and one of the producers were doing a location scout, and they saw the girl in the other corner waiting for the bus. And they approached her. She was the daughter of a grocer.
Was she reading Ivanhoe?
No. No, she said that at the beginning, her mother or her sister were really troubled because there were two grown men looking at her too attentively. And then they said, we want to cast her in a movie. And it began the process, and she became quite a star in that town. But as I was saying, Thornton Wilder was very famous as a playwright for Our Town. And Hitchcock first found some reluctance from him. He was not sure he wanted this as much as an artistic vehicle as just a cash opportunity. And then Hitchcock met with him, and they had an incredible first meeting. And from then on, an incredible collaboration, to the point where Hitchcock ended up riding on the train with Thornton Wilder from the East Coast from the West Coast to the East Coast, scribbling all the way until Thornton Wilder was drafted to go to the war. They were riding all the way until he went into the recruitment center. So he felt this was that person.